So the next kind of factoring with polynomials is we're going to look at factoring by grouping. The good news is that if you already factor your quadratics by grouping, then this should be like no big addition. Okay, it's like the same thing. So what you want to do with factoring by grouping, the key cue for this is you want to check if you have 4 or more terms. That's generally when factoring by grouping works best. It's not a guarantee that it will work, just like how not all quadratics will factor, not all polynomials will factor. But that's kind of one of your cues is you want to have 4 or more terms. That's kind of a cue that you should check and see if it'll factor by grouping. Okay, so there's sort of 2 different ways to set this up. I'm going to show you 2 different ways of just organizing, and you can do whatever you prefer. Okay, so first way is you just sort of split the problem in half, and then you GCF each half. So the common factor between 5x and 5y is 5. And when I factor that out, I'm left with x minus y. Okay, and then on this side, your common factor is x. So I'm going to pull out a positive x, and that leaves me with x minus y. When you're looking at the second half, you always want to factor out whatever it takes to make this guy positive. So in order to make what's left over positive, I had to pull out a positive. Okay, so you always want this term right here to be positive. Okay, and then from here, now that we got this sort of factored like that, this is now a common factor between those 2 terms, right? So I can factor out the x minus y, and what I'm left over with is a 5 from this guy and a plus x from that guy. Okay, and there's my polynomial factored. Okay, so that's the first way that you can approach this and the first way you can organize this. Now there's a second method where you kind of use a box, okay, that you can also do. And for this method, what you're going to do is you just write the problem in. So 5x minus 5y plus x squared minus xy, right? And then what you do is you just GCF each row and column. So the common factor in this column would be an x, so that goes on the top. The common factor here would be a y, but just like before, you're going to take the sign of whatever the closer thing is. Okay, so I'm taking it a negative y out. These guys, common factor is 5. These guys, common factor is x. And then the stuff that you have written on the edge of the box, those are your 2 factors. Here's the x minus y, and there's the 5 plus x. Okay, so you can set this up either way. Personally, I do it this way, but that way is also acceptable if that helps you organize. Okay, so this guy right here, I'm going to split this in half, GCF each half. So common factor between these 2 is a, and when I pull that out, I'm left with a plus b. And then these 2, the common factor between those is just a 1, right? There's nothing other than a 1 that I can pull out from both of those. So I'm going to pull out a factor of 1, and that leaves me with a plus b. Right? And then the common factor between these 2 terms is the a plus b. So I'm going to factor out a plus b. That leaves me with an a from here and a plus 1 from there. And there's my factored form. Okay, if we'd done this the box way, right, I'm just writing the problem in. Okay, and then GCF each row and column. So common factor here is a, take the sign of the closer box. Common factor there is b, sign of the closer box. Common factor here, a, sign of the closer box. Common factor there is 1. All right, and there you go, a plus b times a plus 1. Oops, I dropped my marker. Okay, so let's take a look at this next one. So this guy right here, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to split this one in half. Common factor in the first half is an x squared, and that leaves me with x plus 2. And then the common factor here, so this is what I was saying before, we always want this term to end up positive. So where this is a negative 9, I'm going to factor out a negative, and then my GCF would be 9. And that's going to leave me with a positive x plus 2. Okay, these 2 things in parentheses need to match. If these don't match, that's your cue that something went wrong. Okay, and that maybe it doesn't factor this way, or maybe you need to do something differently. So from here, common factor is x plus 2. I can pull that out. And that leaves me with x squared minus 9 left over. But wait, there's more. Because x squared minus 9, that's a difference of 2 squares, right? That is a quadratic that we can factor. So far, all of these have just ended up little regular old binomials, but this guy's a quadratic, and we know how to factor that. So I'm going to factor that to x plus 3 times x minus 3. And there's my fully factored polynomial. All right, so let's take a look at this guy. So this one, right, I'm going to start by splitting it in half. Common factor between those two would just be 1, right? Okay, so that's weird, but all right. And then the common factor between these two would be negative x, because I'm going to pull that negative out. So negative x, that's going to leave me with y minus 20. And then we've run into a problem, right? Because the things in parentheses don't match up. Okay, so we've run into an issue here, right? This didn't work. Okay, so we ran into a problem. So that could mean that this problem doesn't factor by grouping. Or it could mean that you just need to be a little bit creative about your reordering it. So when I'm kind of looking at this problem, right, this guy has an x. These two in the middle both have y's, and these two on the outside both only have x's, right? So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to reorder this and put the things with the y's on one side and the things with the x's on the other side, okay, and see if that helps at all. It might and it might not. Okay, so for the record, that pen that I mentioned that I dropped, Ruby the cat is now trying to make off with my pen. She was just over there pushing it around on the ground, and then she picked it up in her mouth and started walking away with it. She's very, very sneaky about the pens, my Ruby. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reorder this. So I'm going to rewrite this as 4x squared and then minus xy. Oop, no, I'm sorry. Plus 20x. Excuse me, I wrote the wrong one. Ruby the cat distracted me. Okay, because those two terms just have x's, and that leaves me with the minus 5y and the minus xy, where the y's are on this side. Okay, so what I did was I reordered it. Okay, and now let's try it. So I'll split it in half here. Common factor between those is 4x, and that leaves me with x plus 5. Common factor between these guys would be a negative y. So I'm going to pull out a negative y, and that's going to leave me with 5 plus x. And x plus 5 and 5 plus x, those are the same thing, right? So now I have a common factor that I can pull out. I'm going to write it as x plus 5, and that leaves me with 4x minus y left over. And there's my factored form. All right, so let's take a look at this one. So looking at this one, right, I'm kind of eyeing this and I'm seeing like, oh yeah, these ones look like it's going to be something similar, right? Where these guys have B's, but those guys don't. So I'm going to start this one just by trying to reorder it. Okay, so I'm going to start by reorder the problem. So I'm going to put 9a squared and then minus 3a and then plus 3ab minus b. Okay, so the sort of the ones with the b's are on the same side. All right, so then my GCF is 3a. That leaves me with a minus 1. GCF here would be b, right? So I can pull that out. And that's going to leave me with, let's see, 3a minus 1. Oops, I forgot a 3 over here. I was looking at them saying, oh man, they don't match. Why don't they match? I thought they were going to match. They don't match because I messed something up. Okay, so that's always a possibility that you accidentally forget to write part of your GCF. But then I've got my common factor of 3a minus 1 and then 3a plus b. Okay, and that is how that is going to factor. Okay, so when you get to a spot where your two things in parentheses don't match, one of three things could be going on. One, you could just need to reorder your problem. Two, you could have made a mistake like I did. Or three, it might just not factor. Okay, if it's in a section where it says factor this problem, it's probably that you either need to reorder it or you made a mistake. But it is possible sometimes that these don't factor.